And we have our next session. Everybody's here for the next session. So Dani Grant, Kate Becker, Zach, Mark O'Shea, Laura Hughes Killen, Sara. Oh my God. Everybody's so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So we're now going to be talking about the REVS initiative, which most people in this conference either are aware of or participated in directly. For those of you who have not, we'll give a little bit of an overview in terms of what REVS is, and we're going to talk in this session both about REVS and kind of what the experience has been, but also trying to broaden out to talk about and think about, sort of connecting to the last session, what is the REVS experience that hundreds of us have been through this year? What sort of insight does that give us into the future of this kind of work and this kind of advocacy? And I'm going to turn it over to Dani. You want to start it off? And I know we've got a real special guest and something that we're really excited to premiere for everybody. But Dani, take it away.
Well, REVS was an initiative that came out, of course, when the pandemic hit, and it was in April. Michael called me and said, what are we going to do? And I said, I don't know. He said, well, let me tell you, I got an idea. And he shared this idea, and the thought was try and bring together people from different cities across the country to work on ideas on how to open up the venues safely and share our resources so that we can do it in a more efficient and faster way, and kind of leverage each other's opportunities and the things that we had. And I was, my background, I'm a venue owner, but the reason I became a venue owner was out of work that I did advocating and developing young artists. And, there was a venue in my area that was really underdeveloped and, going to waste. And so I thought this is the perfect platform for emerging artists to play with national artists touring through. And so that's how I got into this whole thing. And, my heart really lies in making sure that the development of artists and the flow of artists and, and the economic development that our city has in conjunction with that, growing our awareness outside of our city as being a music city and being a place where people want to come visit and people want to be, sharing time and vacationing and that kind of stuff. And the culture in my little city was so much bigger than anyone knew it to be, without kind of raising awareness around it. How do you bring people to the awareness that this is an important culture? So REVS was really important to me. And when we were shut down, instead of twiddling my thumbs, we kind of dug into this. And so I think it's really important, the panelists who are here, if I could ask you, and I'll call you out so that it doesn't feel weird of who's going first, to share, who they are, what their background is. And then what were your expectations joining the REVS pilot in the cohort, and what were and how did you go ahead, Michael?
Well, I think we have Mr. Zach has got something that we're going to start with, aren't we?
Oh, you want to kick it off with that? Great.
Okay. Hi. My name's Zach, and I go pretty far back with Michael. He and I have talked a lot about music and the music business for a long time. And I've been working, I started my career off working in a band called Rogue Wave. So I've kind of played in every venue of every size across this country for many years. And I've kind of been on the artist side for many years. And I started working a couple of years ago with just this small boutique creative agency, kind of just doing commercial work. And when the pandemic hit, we were feeling like we really want to do some advocacy work. And I reached out to Michael and I said, what are you working on? He said, I'm working on this REVS program. What do you think? And so, I felt like it was very compelling, and we wanted to create a creative campaign to sort of express the narrative about what's going on. There's this kind of hope that there's this vaccine coming, and there's this bridge funding that needs to happen to save venues. There's this, a real gap between what needs to happen for musicians and where public policy really lies. And so we felt like there was a story that could be told there. So, as an artist, I recognize the emotional, psychological impact of at any point feeling safe again to perform and feeling like I will have faith in every institution, every place that I go, just as an artist myself, that's something that I will feel safe with personally. And I think that's on the minds of a lot of performers and a lot of people who want to go back and hear music again. There's this leap we're really going to have to make, and it's not all going to happen at once. It's going to be this gradual experience. So we wanted to work on this video piece, which I don't know if Dani or Michael, if you have it, but we created this alongside with a lot of stuff that Dani and Michael had already done. We just kind of put it together to make a compelling little story to tell, to kind of express the value of REVS and what REVS has to say. And if we can all kind of work together as one in establishing safe protocols, that's an important step in getting back if and when we can. So.
Thank you, Zach. And Alex, I think we've got that video ready.
The stakes are incredibly high for the artists, just as much as it is for the venues and the audience that is needing to go see music to heal and to be together and feel better. I think we're all going to need to work together to get through it. Hi, I'm Dani Grant. I'm a venue owner, a musician's advocate, and a longtime fan of live music. And I'm on the leadership group for REVS, which is Reopen Every Venue Safely, which was an initiative brought together by Music Policy Forum in the face of the pandemic.
When we started REVS, we had some pretty basic goals. We knew we wanted to restart music as quickly and as safely as possible when the time was right. We're going to have transparency and clarity about the roles and responsibilities that we all have, whether we are operating a venue, whether we're a musician, whether an audience member. We were looking for a range of pilot cities. We wanted to have a diversity of experiences.
I think Austin overall was in a really great place with respect to the REVS process because we have such a really strong and close-knit community here in Austin. I mean, I think that this has been the basis for what a lot of venues are starting to use to think about what's going to happen when they are able to reopen.
So we're moving into the process where we can share the experiences of the REVS pilots via our webinars, via web resources, via interviews, via blog posts.
So we're using the whole of the REVS program to really educate and inform government about what is achievable and what is possible.
I'm not really sure how comfortable I feel going back into the world with just a mask. This is the time that our communities need to put humanity back into the community.
It is a declaration that arts, heritage, culture, and venues, including independent venues, are central to our quality of life and to our economy, and that we must fight to protect and preserve them just as we do other businesses and cherished institutions in our community.
Now is the time to really consider what's most important and what are the things we're supporting. What are the things that mean the most to us in our memories and our lives, for our kids and for our families?
The stakes are incredibly high. They are potentially devastating to our industry. And in order to get out of this, we're all going to need to work together to figure out how to do it.
All right. Well, I think with that, and that really summed up really kind of what was the sentiment coming out of the REVS project. And I think it's important if we go to our panelists now and introduce who you are and, how you got into the REVS pilot and how it impacted you guys. So let me start with Lori.
Thanks, Dani. Good morning, everyone. I was able to attend some of the panels yesterday and great conversations all day long. I was bouncing in and out. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of the day today. My name is Hughes Killen, and I'm from the Portland REVS pilot program. And I'm with Music Portland. I'm the president of Music Portland advocacy group here in the city. And I'm also the talent buyer for Mississippi Studios. First, I want to say, this has just been an incredible process. I came in with not a whole lot of expectation other than just to get everyone together and just talk. And so we've been very successful in that. Portland's been we've had an interesting dynamic here for quite a while. the city's been pretty siloed. And that's one of the reasons that Music Portland came together, was to try to, 2 years ago, try to start unifying all the sectors together. So when this opportunity came up, the groundwork had actually already been laid. It's interesting because one of the first issues that Music Portland got involved with was an issue that we needed to come together to save our venues, because we were under threat 2 years ago from this URM mandate, which is unreinforced masonry buildings, that were threatening a lot of our kind of older venues. That we could have lost quite a number. So we had to build that network 2 years ago to get venues talking, which is not something that is traditionally done, which I'm sure a lot of you probably maybe experience as well. Like, we're competitors, so we don't talk. So fortunately, we had kind of already broken ground 2 years ago. So when it came time to start getting the venue owners and the operators involved in the conversation, that network was already there. We also had the funding challenge became a really key piece in our discussions as well, because we right away from the get-go, once again, the venues got together and started rallying and trying to figure out, well, how are we going to go to the state and ask for support? And so back in literally day one, from the moment we were shut down, that conversation was already in process. So it was really interesting how we had to work together, because there were two separate groups working on what seemed to be two separate challenges, but they actually worked together in tandem. So we had to stay really involved in the conversations with NEVA and what was going on with the development with our state organization here, Independent Venue Coalition, and really be careful about how we timed the conversation so that we could keep the focus on making sure that the venues got the support that they needed. One of the issues being that our mandates here were so restrictive that there's just no way possible to open at all. Multnomah County here in Portland, now we're back in lockdown, but we never got out of phase one, which the restrictions there were 50 people indoor. And that's just not something that's going to be possible for any venue really to do. The other challenge that we faced was we have a lot of varying types of venues, from your little wine bars to that, kind of host maybe solo musicians that are fairly, easy setups, easy to do, to the bars and restaurants that could shift to outdoor dining. So we saw during the summer, all of the bars and restaurants shifted to outdoor dining. And then we saw a lot of those bars and restaurants adding in music programming that they never had that before. So while the venues were very involved in the conversations around when we do get back to business, what does this look like to take care of our staff, take care of our musicians, take care of our patrons, bars and restaurants that had never cared for music programming now were not accessible to us and not involved in the conversation. So that's been a really interesting challenge for us. And yeah, I think, trying to figure out how to touch everybody and make sure that everyone is coordinated and on the same page has been interesting. But it's been a great process. And I have really enjoyed also having the opportunity to learn from other cities. Attending, the weekly office hours for the cohort has been hugely valuable. We were stalled out in our process for most of the summer because we were holding off on trying to win the funding fight. So a lot of other cities were able to do some of that work in advance of us. And so when it was time in August, September for us to get to work, we had a bit more of a roadmap than we did in the spring. So if there was anything I could give to any other city as far as the takeaway, a lot of this advanced work has now been done. And I think it's going to help other cities have a great starting point when they do get back to business. So I think that's kind of the big picture here in Portland.
That's awesome, Lori. And you guys, you're coming from the music advocacy position, and different people from the cohorts came from all different parts of the music ecosystem. And Sara, you're from inside the city. Why don't you share your background and
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I am part of a team called Austin Center for Events, and it is really the permitting arm for all indoor and outdoor events on public and private property. So it's a collaborative group of agencies, including the public safety folks, as well as transportation, parks and rec, our corporate office with our city manager support. And traditionally, that group has reported directly to the city manager's office. And so when that group also includes, Austin, as Bobby mentioned in the video, has a really great network with musicians and venues, and it also includes the music office, which is part of our economic development department, and it's a feature that not every city has. So Austin is very fortunate that we kind of have this element embedded already in our governmental system. And so I didn't really have any expectations when we were asked to participate in REVS. But what I'll tell you is that it has been fundamental in how we've been able to understand what's happening on a national level, implement what some of our sister cities are doing, and then be responsive in a way that is hopefully more meaningful than not in a time that is otherwise just incredibly challenging. Through the REVS program, we worked with it was a community-led initiative to put together the first Reopening Every Venue Safety Guide. And it's really from the venue owner perspective, and some of our local event leaders led that effort with our music permitting folks, and we're able to put that out. And really what the guise of that document is to sort of prepare venue owners for what it would take when it's time to reopen. And then the sister document that will come out probably early in 2021, it's a reopening guide for indoor and outdoor venues from the government perspective that'll lay out what folks can start to expect. Like a lot of other cities, we just moved yesterday to a stage 4, which I think is the opposite of how Portland does it, but it's one stage away from the worst stage as far as our case counts and our hospital access. So things are still pretty heightened in Austin. But this group has really been really critical. And the one thing that I want to make sure is clear is that, the funding piece has been probably the most challenging part of not being able to open and not being able to operate. And so what we've done by participating in this group is sort of pick the brains of all the other cities. And so Kate and King County have really been pretty critical in sharing information about what they've done for venues. And it's not moving along as quickly as I think some folks would like. There were people protesting at the Capitol yesterday about this, but the city does have what's called a SAVES program. It dedicates about $10 million specifically to venues, including legacy venues. And so that program and that relief is forthcoming. And I think, in a large part, that was due to the work that this group has done to model what some of the other cities are doing that's really being supportive. So we're very grateful to have been able to participate in this.
Yeah, and the contributions from Austin were incredible. And, Kate and King County came out with some of that funding very early on and were critical kind of for, I think, galvanizing some excitement and some hope in the group. Kate, will you define what kind of you went through with your work groups?
I would love to, Dani, but Sara, I just have to ask you, there were people protesting the SAVES funding? Good grief.
Not the SAVES funding. I think there's, frustration with the speed in which the program has come available. And so, as city council approves these programs, staff is in a position of then having to figure out how to distribute the money, set up the application process. So there's the administrative back end that it takes time, and that team is working pretty hard to get it out the door. But there's folks in dire straits, so it's understandable why there's frustration.
Totally get it. Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Becker. Really happy to be here with you. I am the Creative Economy and Recovery Director in King County, which is where Seattle, Washington is. I work for King County Executive Dow Constantine, who you just saw in that video, and he was with us yesterday as well. He happens to be the most music-loving politician I have ever known, and I know a lot of politicians, so I'm in a very good place to do this work. After having tried to do it under 5 different mayors, I'm really happy to be working with the executive now and moving this work forward, because lots of things are understood without explanation, which is invaluable. In Seattle and King County, our venues, let's see, on March 11th, I went to talk to venue owners, gathered them together and said, the governor has just restricted capacity to 250 people. By March 16th, we were down to 50 people and venues were closed. Now we are in a full live entertainment ban and have been for months, and not even a busker is allowed to perform in King County or Seattle, Washington right now. So we're in a pretty extreme state. And when we launched REVS, we brought together a combination of music venue owners, musicians, public health officials, and some communication strategists. And we did that by design. We thought that's what we will need to get this work moving forward. So the bulk of it is venue owners, but definitely those other folks are involved. And it became a pretty large group. And we meet every Tuesday, and we have had tremendous conversations. And some of the unexpected things that have happened is that people have stayed really engaged. We've had some other city collaborators from other places around the country join our weekly meetings, which has been tremendous. And we really tried to focus on 3 things. We knew that the reopening guidelines were being developed by another group of venue owners that came together in the wake of COVID as well, called WANMA, Washington Nightlife and Music Association. And they are a great advocacy group of solely venue owners across the state. And they put together the reopening guidelines to propose to the governor. And they were working on that. We thought, great, let's have them do that. And we will focus on, what about musicians and music workers? What about complicated business models? If you have a venue that books local talent, that's different than if you are booking touring talent. The touring issue is really, really challenging. And then the third issue was communication strategy. Once we do get venues back open, given that COVID has so rocked us all, how are we going to get people feeling comfortable coming back out? How are we going to communicate that the venues have done what they needed to do to be safe? How are we going to get our audiences back? And to tell you the truth, we don't have answers to any of those 3 questions, but the work continues and people have stayed engaged. And we tried to wrap it up after 12 meetings, and we've just done our 16th meeting. We're not wrapping it up. We're continuing forward with this work because it's important, and we don't know the answers to those questions. And we need to continue to advise the decision makers so that we end up in a healthy place. And yes, we were lucky enough to champion the first public funding to go to independent live music venues in the country. And we continue to champion that for everyone. We know that the need is so dire and that we have to keep moving this forward. So I think the world of all the REVS participants who've been involved and everyone who has contributed to this effort. You are all doing really groundbreaking work because there's no solutions yet, right? We don't even know how we're going to get there. And so we need to stay connected and stay working on it together. And thank you all for being a part of it.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I mean, the Seattle King County Working Group has shared minutes and invaluable information on the REVS portal. And it's just an incredible opportunity for people to kind of get a glimpse into how you did that work and what were the issues that came up. And I think it's, that's just one city in the portal that's describing what's happening on their home turf. And then Mark O'Shea is with us from, you want to go ahead, Kate?
I just want to say one other thing. I'm not doing it alone. I have 2 co-leads who work with me on this all the time. Scott Pluskulik, the nightlife business advocate for the city of Seattle, and Dina Morris, who you will see later today in a panel with Peter Rogoff, but she used to work for the CDC and run Washington Global Health Alliance after that. So they have been tremendous partners in driving this forward. And it would be irresponsible of me not to mention them. So I want to mention I have great collaborators in this work.
Yeah, who contributed a lot to the cohort, which was incredible. And Mark O'Shea from Akron, who represents Cleveland and Akron's participation in the REVS cohort is here, and you come from a different background.
That's true. I come from the world of touring. I was a tour manager and production manager for many years, tour accountant, person of many hats. And my thoughts on the REVS initiative, I'll just kind of try and share how I got involved with it in probably a series of 3 thoughts. First off, I was part of a locally based Cleveland Akron focus group, as we called it. It was just basically a group of independent venue owners, and I would just kind of sit in and be the emotional support. There's a group of people that got together and just kind of trying to help each other fiscally and emotionally. Secondly, that led me into meeting Megan Van Voorhis from the Arts Cleveland, who brought me in as a consultant because of my expertise as a production manager at the venue, of which I'm in right now. I'm sitting downstage center at the Goodyear Theater in Akron. And having touring expertise and house expertise, I kind of just said, well, I can help you figure out things from many different angles. So as a production manager, as a fan, and then also as a person who's concerned. So in Ohio at the moment, we are at a 15% capacity limitation, which for your sellable capacity, we have a 10 o'clock curfew for everything. And we have a stay-at-home suggestion. I don't have a stay-at-home order. So here I am to share what are my key takeaways from the REVS process. I look at it fiscally, logistically, and emotionally. 3 things I'll share with you guys from my takeaways was learning the importance of a group effort, learning the importance of communication, and learning the importance of empathy. The REVS initiative in its totality, how do I say that? The pilot cities of the King County crew and the many minds sharing their views and thoughts. A second, third, and a 20th set of eyes on a project helped define, refine, and create the REVS program in their documents. Which led me to my next thought was learning your importance of communication. The REVS documents developed and shared with their communities are very important. They will be very important in moving forward because there'll be plenty of people who don't know what they're doing and they're going to be looking for somewhere for guidance. And the best guidance is shared with no strings attached. As part of a group effort, I learned from discussions and my observations, implementations of the results shared with all who need them. We are all learning from this pandemic experience. There were no tried and true methods, no standard protocols. So there are common sense health and safety protocols, but those are going to be needed to be expanded and improved upon. And this allows the REVS initiative to help the public understand and feel safe about returning to live events. And this kind of leads me to my last support. Appreciating the importance of empathy in times of trouble. Empathy, which is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, can either be cognitive, emotional, or compassionate. So seeing someone's perspective, feeling someone's emotionally, and finally feeling the pain, and then thus taking action. And that leads us to where we are as part of the REVS initiative. So those were my takeaways. And I know that, Michael, you had asked us to share how those experiences can have an impact beyond the pilot cohort. I don't know if we share that now or we share that later on. But
good.
That's up to you guys. So.
Yeah, I mean, there was so much. Yeah, you could go ahead and share that now, Mark, or.
Oh, okay. So I felt that, in thinking of empathy, I would say again, my 3 things is empathy allows us to communicate the information we've learned and developed beyond our group effort. We have entered the uncharted waters of the raging sea of the COVID pandemic. Our experiences will calm those who fear stepping off the boat of isolation, doubts, and concerns. I think that the health and safety protocols learned and implemented will be, to certain degrees, used in the live event industry moving forward. Our shows, our festivals, our gatherings will be safer. They will be cleaner and, dare I say, managed more efficiently. Also, many smaller venues will now have an organization to go to contact, get safety and reopening information moving forward. Last but not least, smaller venues and businesses have learned how to navigate the governmental aid systems moving forward. This can come in handy if trying times continue. So that's it.
Thank you, Mark. And while we were all meeting over this time frame, the past 7 months of the office hours, there were incredibly difficult things happening in our communities, and racial injustice, and horrible situations that Kate, you were dealing with. Basically your Capitol on fire during some of the work that we were doing here. How did that impact the thoughts about reimagining how the industry was going to come back?
Well, yeah, King County was where the first COVID cases were. So we were in the heart of that while simultaneously trying to figure this out. And I think I understand your question, Dani, trying to get to the heart of it. Yes, our Capitol was on fire and in some ways remains so, just because we are all, COVID rates are higher today than they were yesterday, and they continue to climb throughout the country. And we still have a long road ahead to figure this out. So one of the good things that we've had with REVS in Seattle and King County is easy access to public health officials, because they are my immediate colleagues. They work for the same person I do. And I know that's been a struggle for lots of the cities to have that public health access. Public health officials are public servants. They should be responsive to their people. So you all should be able to reach out to them and get them to collaborate with you. It's an important part of the puzzle. Dani, am I answering your question at all?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it's just that sharing, how to reach out to people and providing, strategies on how to do that, and how to do that to other people in the cohort was extremely important. And I just feel like the cohort itself became somewhat of a support for everyone trying to struggle through the different things that were happening. I mean, Austin had a different political scheme. Here's Austin inside of Texas, and dealing with the politics that you had to deal with must have been incredibly difficult, along with trying to work with local businesses. And thankfully you had some great support in Austin through the, venue associations that were involved also.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that, Texas is or Austin is a blueberry and a sea of red. And so I think there was definitely a lower risk tolerance for reopening by our local health officials than by the state health officials. And so we, literally up until yesterday are still continuing to try to, find the balance and how to manage all of that. It's incredibly difficult. And, as far as, the lasting components of this, I think there's at least 3 organizations that have either strengthened their relationship with the city through this, or have developed and will probably have lasting lobbying efforts in a way that this industry has not necessarily always had the most organized collective voice. And so from a government official perspective, if one person says, excuse me, I have a problem here, you go, okay, we'll get in line. There's 1,000 people who have problems, and we will get to your problem, but there's 20 people who were here before you. Whereas when you have an entire organization or an industry who's very organized, like so many other industries have been for a really long time, you tend to have more collective bargaining power. And so what we've seen is organizations like the Texas Live Event Coalition, Music Stays Together, REVS strengthening, NEVA's establishment, and then and there's also chapters for the National or the Live Event Association, or ILEA, previously known as ISIS, but they've changed their name. But so those organizations have just either developed or strengthened in their collaboration with each other, and then also with the relationships with the city and the various departments. So I think Mark also mentioned, just the access to government and understanding how to navigate, what funding is available, how do you navigate the application process, how do you get access to it? So hopefully these grant opportunities and additional resources that are so critical right now will also remain accessible once we're back into a place of more normalcy. And so I think those are the as terrible as this is, those are potentially nuggets of light, that resources and relationships are formed in a way that we didn't have them before.
I want to just jump in on a couple of points, and there's a great question from Julie in the Q&A. And I think this was touched on, but just to put a finer point on a couple of things. Ideally, when we began the process, again, as was in the video, and we talked a little bit about, the fundamental goal of selecting the pilots is that we wanted geographic range, we wanted a diversity of experiences, different types of cities, different types of infrastructure, with the idea that everybody, when we get to this question of reopening quickly as safely as possible, when the time is right, is going to have a fundamentally different experience. So it's important to us, again, that we were not being prescriptive top down to say, here's how this is going to happen. It is truly bottom up to say, let's get a range of people who are all trying to figure this out on the fly, to have that local sort of network development aspect, then connecting in on the national level. So, I think everybody kind of spoke to the importance of then being able to learn from each other as we went through it. Now, our goal was, because we're optimists by nature, which is how we do anything, get out of bed in the morning, was our hope when we started this in April was that by Labor Day, we could sort of have a body of work that we could then publish, because again, it's critical, the experience of the pilot cities is obviously been incredibly meaningful and critical for us. But the goal was to say, what can we put out to the world for everybody else? How could we sort of, crystallize this, encapsulate this, so it'd be a resource for every other city that is not a pilot that is doing this type of thinking. And then what we had to do as a community is basically say, well, look, we're not reopening, and we can't even talk about reopening, and we don't want people to be confused that we're somehow saying it's time to reopen. So it was a really tricky messaging point to be like, how do we sort of have this REVS concept while also trying to, model fundamental, responsible behavior, in our communities in a lot of places. So what we've published now, again, are sort of the working documents that all the cities have, contributed, and they're all a little bit different. And Dani, I think that they're put in the chat. And then what we're going to do as a leadership team and with our pilot cities, after this event, after Thanksgiving, early December, is go back under the hood and kind of figure out, okay, what does this look like for 2021? And frankly, we don't know. And something, again, we don't really talk about publicly is that, this has been all volunteer. We don't have a budget. This has been all people volunteering their time, and it's not sustainable, at that level. It's just been more work. So we've got to figure out, do we put together a broader initiative? Are other cities interested in doing a parallel version of this? Do we put together a whole communications team? What, sort of is the play? And again, my hope and assumption is that we have an opportunity with the new administration to bring some federal leadership to bear. And so ideally, the pilots are then going to be able to kind of get into the federal conversation so it can have some more continuity and sort of intention when it is right to open, which again, God only knows when that is, but in, later in 2021. So again, we're all, going to kind of go back under the hood in December and kind of think about what becomes the future of this and all those other pieces. But right now, again, we're just kind of playing it by ear a tiny bit. Thank you for attending my TED Talk. Okay.
We have a couple minutes left. Lori, Zach, anything that you want to throw in here, your experience or your reflections on the REVS project?
Well, I would just say, everybody did touch on this, and I think the main takeaway is that we just got to keep talking, and we can no longer operate as islands and isolated anymore within our own communities and across the country as well. This process has not only allowed me to connect with other, pilot city leaders, but also I've had people from other cities and other states that heard about REVS through a contact through NEVA, who reached out to call me to say, hey, how do I begin this kind of process in my own city, even though we weren't in a place of going public with our information yet. And it just really, at the end of the day, comes down to, again, and everyone keeps saying it, we got to work together. We can't stand isolated and alone anymore. So yeah, that would just be my biggest reflection on all this. And it's been great. It's been it's such a crazy thing to say, this situation is so bonkers and crazy, but yet there's a lot of positivity that's been coming out of it. And I've been through 3 venues now. I've been walked down the drain 3 times, and I feel more connected to people than I ever have. And I'm really grateful for that. Like, I feel more invested in my industry, and I already was really invested. And now sorry, you're not getting rid of me or all of my people. Like, we're all in this together. And I just hope that people can take the spirit of that with them going forward, because there's going to be a lot of challenges ahead. And it is like running an ultra marathon. You know, we got to go the distance. So that would be my biggest takeaway.
I think I would piggyback on what was just said. And I've always felt like this, the pandemic is a mirror. It's a mirror, and it kind of reveals what is good and what is bad about every industry and about who we are and the choices that we're making, and to expect or to have an expectation that our politicians will solve all of our problems for us is not realistic. And we need to kind of take a very disparate music industry and find ways to to unify, as I think that's been suggested. And the expression of unity that we've seen through REVS is really a beautiful thing. And I think it was insightful to kind of have pilot cities that reflect the cross section of the music business, how all these communities are affected so differently. And so, I'm putting my head down and trying to find solutions and try and be positive in the coming year. And so I'm going to try to do everything I can to move forward as well. So.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Back to you, Michael.
Thank you, guys. That was, REVS has been, the community that has been part of this initiative has been such a gift, I think, for all of us. And I think Mark said it really well in terms of the empathy, in terms of, Zoom is so frustrating, but it creates opportunities that are unthinkable. We could not have done this by conference call. To really feel like we've got this community coming together and leaning on each other has really been beautiful. And I so appreciate this segment and everybody's work. And Zach, your whole team, the video is fantastic. And so, yay.